to Truthful. My name is Brian and I have two my special guests here with me, Dr. Fanwar and Dr. Gerard. And we are here to continue our discussion and conversation with regards to Bible translation challenges. In the first episode, we spoke about language challenges to translation, and I understand that in this episode, we will consider literary challenges. And first of all, what does that mean?
Well, when we look at, say, for example, the Old Testament, there is a lot of poetry and storytelling. In other words, narrative and poems.
Right.
Okay, entire books are in poetry, and entire books are stories. The question for a translator is, how do this work? You know, because poetry and stories do not work the same way. They do different things with the grammar, with the words, with the language. Okay, and so that is what we have to look at.
Well, while there is much less poetry in the New Testament, the issues are very similar.
Well, I see. Let's consider these issues from this point of view. Dr. Fanwar, what is literary issues do you see in, go back to the first text in the Bible, Genesis 1 verse 1.
Okay, I think the first literary issue that we have to contend with is, after we read that God created, what did He create? In other words, the predicate of the sentence. Okay, and the Hebrew says, the heavens and the earth. Well, that's the translation. Okay, now if you recall from our first conversation, that Hebrew has limited vocabulary. For instance, there's no word for universe in Hebrew. And so they employ what we call a word pairing. A literary term for it is merism, where you get a part of one reality and the second part of that same reality, combine them together to express a singular reality. So heavens and earth is not about the sky and the ground, it's about the universe. And the most accurate English translation should be, God created the universe, the cosmos. Now, literary convention or translation convention has forced us to keep heavens and earth because, we've gotten used to that. But it really means the universe. And in English, we have the word for it. So my contention is you have to be true to both languages. Okay, so heavens and earth is not telling us sky and land, but rather know the whole universe. But we have a word for it in English. In fact, we have two words for it, universe and cosmos. And so probably we should use both of these. Secondly, we're still in that verse, but if we move a little further, we discover that the sentences are very short. From verse 2, the focus is entirely on the earth, which means that from a storytelling point of view, the creation of the universe occupies one verse. The rest of chapter 1 is all about the earth from chapter 2. But even that is pretty brief, only 30 verses. The whole creation week, everything that God created on this planet, all in 30 verses. If we were writing this in English, with English storytelling style, this would be a whole book.
The whole thick book.
Yeah. So this is the difference. Hebrew can do so much with so little. English needs a whole lot more to do the same thing. So while we have gotten used to the text, but in reality it reflects that literary pattern. And this holds throughout the Old Testament, that Hebrew storytelling, the hallmark criteria or the hallmark factor is brevity. They don't waste or mince words in telling stories. Okay, and so you tell story of how the whole universe came into being in 31 verses. Come on, this is almost crazy, but that's how it is.
So if we look at, if you follow us in the first episode, we know that in Hebrew the vocabulary was quite limited. They have probably around 20 over 1,000 words, as compared to English, which has probably 1 million vocabulary. But the Hebrew writers understood the concept, right? When they put Hashamayim, for example, the word heavens, they understood that. So that's one. Dr. Gerard, back to John 1:1. Is there anything that you see that should be discussed here?
Yes, of course, there is something that we can consider here, since John 1:1 echoes Genesis 1 verse 1, especially the in the beginning, phrase there. So similar rules apply here as well. Where we have to be careful into looking at not just John 1:1 actually. You need to look at the rest of it as well, the prologue section of it until verse 18, because the parallel is very clear. The statement in John 1 verse 1 to 18, I would say, is very succinct, it's very packed with significance. For example, in the first 5 verses, you see word, you see light, you see man, world, and the rest of the prologue also you can see that it is quite brief, but it is packed with significance. Even the first verse, in the beginning, what does that mean? Well, if you understand in the beginning in Genesis 1 verse 1, then perhaps here you can understand it similarly as you understand it in Genesis 1 verse 1. Yeah,
definitely we will carry that understanding to reading John 1 verse 1. We call that convention in the first episode. Dr. Fanwar, you mentioned about the word pairing. Can you provide another example?
Well, not from Genesis 1:1, but in verse 2, we can. There is an expression there that translators have probably struggled the most in dealing with Genesis chapter 1. And that is the expression tohu wavohu. This is nothing to do with tofu, but anyway, it's tohu wavohu. How do you translate this? First of all, they are a word pairing, but it's not a merism like in verse 1, where it's 2 halves, okay? These words have almost identical meanings. The basic meaning of tohu and bohu is nothing. I mean, not that they are nothing, but the idea of nothing. Okay, these are words that are meant to describe how nothing was there. Think of it more like a balloon with just air inside. Smallest prick and it will burst. But they are also sound words. Okay, so it's kind of like in English. English has a lot of sound words. Ouch. Oh,
okay.
Aha, Those words have no actual meaning.
Correct.
Okay. They're just sounds to express, like aha expresses surprises, ouch expresses pain. And so on. So tohu wavohu is like saying ouch, ouch, or ow, ow, or aha, aha, kind of thing. And so since they both convey the concept of nothingness, basically what the text is saying is that the earth was nothing. No form, no, this is one verse where you can go into all the English translations and you'll probably find slightly differing meanings. Okay. Translation convention has not held so firm on verse 2 as it has on verse 1. And so combine those two things. They are sound words, which means that they are empty words with no real lexical meaning. And their basic meaning, if any, is nothing, nothing. It's like saying nothing, nothing. Or my view of this is it's like saying okay. And they even sound that way, isn't it? Tohu, bohu, if you soften the first syllable. Yeah, okay. It's like blowing air. Okay. This type of word pairing is called hendiadus. It's the most distinctive form of word pairing in the Hebrew Bible, and to a great extent in the New Testament as well. Some scholars have argued that it's unique to the Bible, but I think our earlier discussion before we started is that there are elements of it in almost every Asian language that we know, that we have come across, but not as theologically or ideally impacting in terms of concepts and stuff as in Hebrew. Because in the Hebrew Bible, the way they would extend the meaning of a concept is through word pairing. And this is the most important one. When you get into poetry, it's just full of these hendiadus. Okay, it makes translation so tricky because English does not have hendiadus. English does not use Hindiadus. There are word pairings in English. For merism there is, to some extent. But Hindiadus is almost foreign to Indo-European languages. That's why not so much in the New Testament. If it is, it's more Hebraism at work than anything else. But it's packed. Now, some scholars argue that this is a Semitic thing. And we do see some of that in, say, modern Arabic, which is a Semitic language as well. Perhaps. But it seems to have been a special coinage of the biblical writers, the Hebrew biblical writers. And so it affects interpretation tremendously. Not coming to terms with the Hindiadus means you will get the wrong meaning.
Well, that sounds very fascinating, Dr. Gerard. But how can that help, common Bible readers?
Well, common Bible reader, we probably do not know much of this, but I think it's helpful because most Bible translations have notes, sometimes footnotes that explains the dynamics there. So I would suggest that we should not neglect those marginal information in the English Bible or in the translation, because they do provide such data.
And I think it's important in selecting your Bible versions. This is something that all the modern versions do. They provide us textual information. The one that probably is best for this is the Net Bible.
Yes.
The New English Translation. It has its own website, that you can access. It's got notes for almost every word. I mean, literally, the whole Bible. And it's really helpful, because without that external aid, we may not be able to see some of these unless you have the technical expertise. And so a common Bible reader should not be thinking of, this is the version my parents use and therefore it must be good enough for me. That kind of logic. Should be looking at, what is it providing me? We should use the same common sense we do when we go out to buy a mobile phone, right? We look at its specs.
Correct.
And when you shop for a Bible today, look for its specs. What is it providing? What kind of aid? And dealing with some of these literary issues, which are really foreign to most readers, is where the Bible translations are the most helpful. Don't you think so?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So, back to John 1:1, Dr. Gerard.
Yes.
Any distinctive literary feature there you can highlight?
Oh, yes. Of course, we don't see poetry as, or maybe word pairs. We do see some poetry there. John chapter 1, verse 1, the prologue, actually. But we especially see one literary feature in John chapter 1, verse 1. That's what we call the noun replacement. Now, the technical word for it is metonymy.
Oh, very mysterious.
It is. It's very mysterious. Well, to understand this better, it is something that is even used today, especially in the newscast, for example, news reporting. So I'll give you an example. In reporters in the U.S. will, well, I guess not only in the U.S., but especially when they use the name Washington to refer to the U.S., to refer to the country. So they normally, instead of saying the U.S., the United States, the reporters may say Washington. It's just a metonymy or word, a noun replacement to the U.S. It is a common practice today, actually.
So so that's the noun replacement, right?
Yes.
I think it's quite similar if that state is the governing state of the country, and it can represent by saying, so it is present there in John 1:1.
It is. Well, it is clear. So when we read John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Well, we should not stop there to read. You need to read until verse 18, when finally we realize that, hey, this word is referring to Jesus all along, because by the time we reach verse 14, we now know that it refers to Jesus. And then we move on until verse 18. So if we are to put this literary feature here in John 1:1. It can read like this because the word logos refers to Jesus. It is replacing that noun, Jesus. It can read like this. In the beginning was Jesus. Jesus was with God and Jesus was God. You see, every time you see that logos replaces Jesus.
That's great. Dr. Fanwar, you mentioned that the Old Testament has a big chunk of material in poetry. You know, one of it was narration and poetry. Can you enlighten a bit further?
In every language, poetry is different from prose. That's why in school we all learn, poetry and prose, whether you're learning English or Bahasa or Thai or whatever. This is more important because the Bible is truth, right? And so we want to discover truth.
Correct.
But you can't apply the rules for understanding prose or narrative to poetry. For Hebrew narrative, the dominant concept is brevity. Okay, say as little as possible. And most Hebrew stories avoid the emotional content that English stories love.
Yes.
Okay, and so God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son. He gets up the next day, takes the boy to the mountain, he sacrifices him. Where are the feelings?
There's no time for putting all these details.
Where are the emotions? Where is Sarah? None of that. Hebrew poetry works entirely differently from English poetry. You see, English poetry is characterized by what we call rhyme and meter. Okay, that's why when you look at all the English songs we sing, there's a rhyme somewhere. Okay, now Hebrew poetry has some meter, so there is a count that you can do, but it's minimal. Its dominant feature is what we call parallelism, lines working together. What this means is that you have to detect the different kinds of parallel lines. Okay, and a basic rule about that is this: the parallel lines are not different thoughts, they are one thought. And most people who read the Psalms, or many pastors that I've heard who preach from the Psalms, preach a gospel that doesn't exist because they did not know the parallelism. They did not see, they were not taught, they did not recognize. Okay, so let's look at some of the more common parallelisms. Right, Mr. Gerard, can I borrow a pencil from you, a pen? Okay, Brian has one. Is that a pen or a camera?
This is a this is a pen.
Okay.
Maybe we can get another pen on the table.
All right, parallelism could be as simple as two lines that are running in the same direction, like a train track. Okay, we call this synonymous parallelism. In the book of Proverbs, you have the most common parallelisms where two lines, but they're running in opposite directions.
How come?
It's called antithetical. It's the easiest to spot because it is joined by a disjunctive conjunction in English, but. The wise man is, but the fool is, it's very clear.
Understood.
But the most distinctive parallelism in Hebrew is this, where the two lines cross each other. It's called a chiastic construction. Okay, and the center of the thought is where the two lines actually meet, come to each other. Okay, this is distinctive. It doesn't exist in English, but I did find a chiasm in one modern worship song that actually had a perfect chiasm. Okay, but we're talking about Hebrew, so let's leave that alone. A fourth common one is what we call an inclusio or an envelope, where you have the first line and the last line perfectly parallel each other, but there are a lot of other lines in between. Okay, and so in this kind of parallelism, the main thought comes in the envelope, not so much what's inside. Okay, in this kind of parallelism, the main thought is at the cross point.
Yes.
Okay, with synonymous, the two thoughts are exactly the same. The words may be different, but they're exactly the same. With this one, it's very easy to detect because this is going one way, this is going the other way, crisscross each other. Now, none of that works in English. None of these pens work in English. There's no English that does this, or that does this, or that does this, or does this. And so when we translate, this is where the modern versions are superior to the old English Bibles, because The old English Bibles did not understand parallelisms. And so you cannot even detect it. You cannot even see it. The modern Bibles have tried very, very hard to show us these parallelisms. When you read Psalms and Proverbs, you can see them. They're put in that poetic form with the parallelisms highlighted in some ways. They don't always get it right.
Let's go back to Genesis 1:1.
Okay.
Any days of this there?
Okay. When you look at Genesis 1:1, well, you actually need to move down into verse 2.
Verse 2.
Okay. It says something very interesting. After saying tohu wabohu, nothing, it tells us that the darkness covered the faces of the deep. And then there's an expression, not long after that the Spirit of God was upon the faces of the waters. You see, the expressions are identical. Faces of the deep, faces of the water, right? Darkness and spirit. They're running. It's a synonymous parallelism.
Nice.
Here's the interesting thing about parallelisms is they're not confined to poetry. Because Hebrew narratives were also written to be sung, which means they have that poetic feel about them. Okay, so the earth was tohu wavohu, but not quite, because there are faces of the deep and there are faces of the waters. One is displaying darkness, one is displaying light.
The spirit which brings light.
Yeah. And so it's a more graphic depiction of the creation of the earth than you could ever find in any English lit.
John 1, Dr. Gerard, anything?
Yes, I guess it's more on the parallel can be said as an in a intertextual correspondence, or intertextual parallel, call it between.
Just comparing John and
so
Genesis.
when you put them together, Genesis 1:1, John 1:1, you can see an arche that's in the Septuagint, okay, in Genesis 1:1, and then in John 1:1 you see an arche as well. In the beginning. That signals something, that John 1 or John 1:1 to 18 in a way should look at Genesis chapter 1 for the parallel, for some of the parallels. I'll give you an example here.
Yeah.
In John chapter 1 you see the word light, example, okay. You also see the word light, or a reference to light in Genesis chapter 1. Okay, so in Genesis chapter 1 you see the culmination of the creation, human beings being created, so man on day 6. The same sequence actually happened if you look at John chapter 1 very carefully, because it says beginning in verse 2 of John chapter 1, you see that the Logos parallels light, or the word is the light of man. You know, you look the rest of the verse in verses 1 to 5. So what you see here in Genesis 1, light, the word created light and ends with man. In John chapter 1 verses 1 to 5, you see there word light, and then the light was the word was the light of man. It helps. It has something to do with man. It provides help. The light provides help, aid to human beings.
Why is it doing that?
I think what John is doing is he's copying the structural pattern of Genesis 1 in his prologue. And this is fairly common, especially with John. I think Dr. Gerard will agree with me. The idea is, don't reinvent the wheel. You know, this has been done in Genesis 1.
Okay.
I don't need to do. But he's trying to bring the new meaning, because whatever happened in 1 is now being fulfilled in John 1, Genesis 1 in John 1. And so the pattern remains the same. So the literary patterns are very similar. In fact, they're more than similar. They seem to be intentional to follow the pattern. And so in order to understand John 1, we need to first contend with Genesis 1. It's amazing how some people begin studying the Bible in Matthew and know nothing about the Torah, backwards.
Yeah,
so we do this reverse engineering kind of thing. And so the literary patterns influence each other. And as Dr. Gerard mentioned, from an intertextual point of view, you see not just words similar or phrases similar, but structures being similar. And we picked these two passages intentionally because of how they actually reflect each other.
The concept of typology here.
There's concept of typology here. And then what I want to mention about that whatever we see in the Torah is now fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Now, in a way, in John chapter 1, verse 1, you can see how Jesus fulfilled what is there. Now, there you see the first creation. Okay, but in John chapter 1, you see the new creation in Jesus.
It's great. On that note, Dr. Fanwar, Dr. Gerard, we conclude our discussion in this second episode. And friends, don't forget to tune in to the next episode of Truthful with FULL, Bible Translation Manuscript Challenges. We'll see you again in the next episode.